Okay, welcome back to video number 3. This video is about an advanced topic which is not required, so to speak, and that is the use of a thin server, meaning model number 1. There are certain steps that we have to take here, which are quite advanced and which are most useful, I believe, for the at least occasional Unix aficionado. So you definitely need to have good command line skills and so on. Okay? So this video, as it is not required, you do not have to do that, but if you want to use the model number 1, you will have to follow these or somewhat similar steps, okay? So what we want to do today is we want to set up the thin server. We want to set the settings on the virtual machine such that it automatically connects to the thin server. And then we also want to run a quick session, and I want to show you how the look and feel is with a thin server. Okay, so let's get started. So quite a few minor notes here. Upon initialization, Z3 Unleashed automatically creates a SSH key. So that is very important, and you can import what is in that file right here on the thin server. So I assume that you use a normal thin server with OpenSSH, and you should put this line right here into the /root/ssh/authorized keys file. And if you are a Unix aficionado, you already know what I'm talking about, so I won't go into much further detail. However, this enables us to securely log in to the root account, right? Okay. The second thing that I want to mention is that on the thin server, you should actually disable password logins. So you should not allow people to log into the thin server using passwords. Only use these public keys, right? Only use public key cryptography and do not use passwords. That's totally insecure. And that ties into the third point I wanted to make here, which is that whatever method you use, you should definitely consider encrypting this virtual machine because, of course, the virtual machine also contains the private key. And if someone were to steal that private key, which would be quite easy right now, you could easily also access the root user on the thin server, which obviously would be quite insecure. So consider doing that. Consider encrypting the virtual box, which is quite simple. You can just go to the machine settings, and you can go to disk encryption. And if the machine were turned off, you could easily enable disk encryption. And I definitely recommend that you do that with a secure password. And so something else that might come up is that this device right here also has an SSH server running, which, for example, can be used to transfer files using FileZilla and other software. That is somewhat secure in the sense that that is only running if the virtual machine is running, first of all. And secondly, it's only available over the loopback interface. So even someone in your network cannot SSH into your machine. It can only be done from the host machine itself. So that is the good news. However, if you wish, and I definitely recommend that you do so, you should change the passphrase of the lab account right here, and you might also want to disable the sudo settings such that you need to enter a password every time you need to use the sudo command, which is frequently because that is a command used by many of the scripts that I have. Sorry. Okay, so these are just some quick notes about security. However, now we want to set up the thin server, but for that we have to generate a WireGuard config. Now, you might think that you can simply double-click here and it happens, but that is not the case because this file actually doesn't exist yet, so this doesn't work. But it is fortunately quite easy to do that. You only have to change a few settings, and for that we have to go to Settings. Then we keep the defaults for most values right here, font size, prefix, yeah. And then we come to the model section. And of course here we have to answer 1, right? Because we want to add this thin server, which the subjects interface with and indirectly access this virtual machine, right? Because perhaps we are on a mobile network or the lab is behind a firewall or a router and so on, right? So in this case we have to enter 1. And if we do that, we will automatically be asked to generate a WireGuard config. And fortunately, I wrote a script that does that for you, okay? And now we have to enter the IP or the host name of the thin server. And that obviously requires 2 things. First of all, that the thin server already exists and has a publicly reachable IP address. It could be IPv4 or IPv6, doesn't matter. And secondly, also the thin server must have WireGuard installed, right? So WireGuard is free software, and you can easily install it under most Unix-based systems. Okay, so these are the 2 requirements. Let's enter the IP address of the thin server. However, we will actually enter the host name because that is also allowed. And I have registered a very nice domain here for this tutorial, which is cologne.games, because we are from Cologne and games is a very nice top-level domain, which I highly recommend to you. Okay, press enter. And this generates automatically config files. And I see there is a small bug here, which will be fixed as soon as this video is out. Okay, but nevertheless, the configs have been automatically generated. And we are also assigned private IP addresses for both the thin server as well as ourselves. These are only valid in our virtual private network and they are never seen on the internet, right? Okay, and now we want to automatically install the local config because that is the sensible thing to do if you use our virtual machine image. And we're done. And then let's take a look back here. Everything worked, and as soon as the thin server is enabled, we will be able to ping the thin server using the private IP address, right? Which is never seen on the internet, but we will be able to ping the thin server over this private IP address, which by the way is static. So our IP address as well is also static. Now, of course, you have to answer a few more questions. We will come back to that config later on. We have to enter the host name, which after all is what subjects see in the URL, right? However, you can simply enter the host name of the thin server, which is of course the major advantage of using the thin server, right? So we just enter cologne.games. Okay, nice. And the certificates, they are a little bit more difficult, unfortunately. Okay, so at this point I'm asked to enter the SSL certificate, which I looked up on the thin server and which will vary from case to case. So the whole procedure is quite simple, but that is not so simple. You have to get a true certificate and you have to enter the path on the thin server, right? Right here. So what you have to enter is, in my case, /root cert1.pem, and the private key is root privkey1.pem. So these 2 files will vary from case to case, and this is by no means universal, right? Okay, done, and we are done. Okay, and we want to use this ping command to check whether our connection has succeeded. So we can just paste it here, but if we press enter right now, this will not work because obviously we haven't set up the thin server yet, right? Let's press enter right here because we have copied the IP addresses. Okay, unfortunately the config closed now, but we can reopen it using this program right here. And that is what has to be installed on the thin server, right? And there's also a small guide right here. And we have to install it in a certain directory. Now, this didn't succeed because, of course, it's not online yet, right? So the thin server is not initialized yet, but let's run this in the background. And as soon as we have enabled the config on the thin server, this should work, okay? So let's open another tab, let's pull it right down here, and now I will log in as root on my thin server, right? So as you can see, Cologne.games is the thin server in this example. Now this is actually a little bit of a special case, which I include nevertheless as an example, because this is actually a FreeBSD server. So this is not a Linux server, and also on Linux distributions it varies where you have to put it. But I personally do barely use Linux, actually. I mainly use FreeBSD, and therefore we will use a FreeBSD server. The setup is a little bit different, however, only in one respect. And that respect is where the files are put. And most importantly, we have to put the WireGuard config into the following file. Okay, so notice how I put the entire path right here, and Nano is of course a simple editor that we will use here. And this path has to be used on FreeBSD. However, on Debian and Arch Linux, you can use that config right here, right? So it's a little bit shorter, but that depends from system to system, okay? So now I open this file and I put in this entire stuff. I paste it, then I press Ctrl O to save the file, enter, and Ctrl X to close, and yet it doesn't work. Well, that's obvious because we haven't started it yet. But as soon as I type WG quick, so WireGuard quick up, and then I have to use the base name of this config file without the extension, which is WG _ZU. And now it's online. However, in this special case, we cannot use certain commands. So actually, this was on purpose to show you that it's not that universal. And you might see that we also have a comment right here that there may be some things that you have to change, right? And in this case, actually, we have to remove these two lines right here. The post up and post down lines should be removed on FreeBSD. On Debian and Arch Linux, they can remain. However, you might have to remove the post down line if you have multiple WireGuard configs. So that's just an information. There's no problem at all with using multiple WireGuard configs, but you will have to remove that line right here. Okay, so let's save this again and start it again. And now the pings will slowly start to arrive. As you can see here, suddenly they arrive. And now our thin server is interconnected through the internet with the virtual machine right here, and it's over this secure virtual private network, right? So if we do ping 10.150.119.2, which is the virtual machine, we can also reach the virtual machine from the thin server. And that is precisely what we want. Okay? So that is step 1, essentially, setting up WireGuard on the thin server. Okay, so everything is working fine. That's great. They are interconnected. And we have also achieved the configuration. We have put all the correct settings in, so that's fine. And we are almost done. However, since we don't know what precise setup you use and what systems you use, by the way, you could even use Windows as a thin server, that's also possible. Since we do not know that, there is some additional stuff involved that you have to do. But for this example, I put an extra script into the repository, which should be invoked as soon as a session is started, right? And how can we do that? Well, we have this extras folder, and it has this example FreeBSD, and there is the hook.sh, and this script should be executed after a session has been started, and this will copy the correct config that is generated by Sentry Unleashed onto the server, onto the thin server, and then it will enable and restart Nginx, right? Now, for that to work, we also have to put in this Nginx config on the thin server, which isn't that difficult. However, you have to really find the path where this is. And I will not show you how I did that because I cannot remember, to be honest, the exact path on FreeBSD. However, it's quite simple to find, right? The essential line is that one right here, because that line right here will subsequently include the generated Nginx config as soon as the thin server Nginx is restarted and the config is uploaded to the server, right? So this is essential, and this is the essential line. And if you have other use cases for Nginx, you can merely add this line, and your normal config will not be polluted, which is quite important, obviously. So there's another small change, because again, we don't know what setup you use, and I definitely can recommend FreeBSD, but I cannot force you to use it, and therefore you have to make an additional small adjustment in the scripts right here. Or you can also go to lab scripts, and there is a file which is called thin hooks. And this script will be executed as soon as a session has started. And in this example, we can merely invoke the hook.sh script, and that will basically do everything that's required here. Okay? So what we have to put in here is just the following. We just have to put in source, and then the path of this script, which is Sentry Unleashed, extras, example FreeBSD, I think. Yeah, example FreeBSD /hook.sh. And that is this file right here, and that should be executed. Now let's check whether this is actually valid, this path. Yes, this works. So this should work, this config should work, and you should be able to execute this script quite easily, okay? And no additional config should be required at this point, so this should be all you have to do. You have to create a hook script, and you have to do some stuff on your server perhaps. You have to install this Nginx config, but the rest is essentially quite simple, right? Everything else will be done by Sentry Unleashed. So the only thing that I didn't show right here is, first of all, putting in the SSH key, right, that I showed you at the beginning, the public key as the root authorized key. And I also didn't show you how to install this Nginx thin config, because at the moment I cannot remember the exact path. But again, it shouldn't be a big problem. Just put it into the file, and if you already have a config, just put in this this line right here, right? And the hook script will upload the generated config to the correct file, which will again subsequently be included by Nginx. Okay, so that's basically it. You only have to do this. You only have to do this once. The restarting of Nginx will be automatically performed every time you create a session. Okay, so let's now start a session. We just have to press a double click on Start Session. Then we have to select the set leaf executable and the set tree executable. We want to start 32 clients. And now everything should be initialized on this virtual machine right here and also on the thin server. So let's check out whether this worked. We are starting the clients. Okay, so this can be answered just by saying yes. That's just fine. Okay, the Nginx was uploaded, as you can see. It was enabled and it was restarted. Okay, awesome. That looks quite fine. And what's even cooler is that if we show the URLs again, we see that we now have our custom domain, right? And this, remember, is the thin server. And the thin server will internally redirect the data to this virtual machine, but this virtual machine does not have to be reachable over the internet, right? So let's check this out. We should be able to just enter this right here. That's interesting that it says unknown issuer. That's actually not correct. So I guess the Firefox doesn't have a correct list of trusted issuers. That's not correct actually, because it is actually an official certificate that we use on Cologne.games. But you can see we are now connected through the internet to this virtual machine, right? And this is very user-friendly, obviously, because we can give subjects this URL, which doesn't have any strange numbers in it really, right? Only the port number and the password, but the domain is totally fine, right? And totally normal. And everything will now be proxied, or reverse proxied rather, from the subject to the Cologne Games thin server. And then the thin server will redirect everything to this virtual machine right here. And you can see we are right now, since it is going over the internet, we are right now playing over the internet, and we are using all of the advantages of the thin server, right? And this is, I think, a very attractive method of setting up the server. And as you can see, this was also quite simple. It wasn't that difficult, and you just have to do it once, right? And then it basically just works, right? So definitely check that out. Write your own hook scripts if you don't use FreeBSD, even though I can definitely recommend FreeBSD. Write your own hook scripts, and this should not be too difficult. And install the Nginx thin config, which you can also just copy and paste essentially, because that is always identical wherever you use Nginx. The architecture doesn't really matter. You just have to change a little bit of stuff right here, I guess, and maybe also some stuff right here. Worked very well. We didn't have any major problems. And you can then give subjects these user-friendly links. And this is also, of course, very secure. And for more information about the advantages of using the thin server, I recommend that you read our working paper. And I think the use of a thin server is an extremely flexible method of setting up set3 Unleashed. And it also allows you to roam between networks. So, for example, if you were to take the laptop that is running this set3 Unleashed, you could, during an experiment, you could take it on a train, for example, and use the mobile internet that is provided by a hotspot, for example, from your iPhone. And subjects wouldn't even notice that there would be a delay in the connection, right? So WireGuard roams between networks and there will be no issues whatsoever. So definitely check that out. We will now terminate the session. And yeah, that's it basically for the configuration of the thin server. As you see, it was quite easy, quite straightforward. But this is definitely a slightly advanced topic, and therefore I suggest that you ask your local Unix administrator to set this up for you, and hopefully this is as user-friendly as possible. Okay, thanks a lot for tuning in, and see you next time. Bye.